The next time you need auto parts and accessories, trust the parts professionals at the 102 Chicagoland O'Reilly Auto Parts stores. Our professional parts people know what it takes to get the job done right. Professionals have counted on O'Reilly Auto Parts for decades. Now you can too. Professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts, better prices every day. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebfried in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for the truth, good communication is key. Our phone lines are open for questions or stories. The call-in number is 661-244-9831. Our chat room is also open, so you can type in your questions or comments as well. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, and full show uploads. And if you have specific questions, comments, or would like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your minds. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
You know, when we first hear about alien abductions, it's easy to dismiss the entire idea as crazy or unprovable nonsense. However, after doing a little research into the matter, you're going to find that there's actually a lot of evidence that supports their occurrence. Since the late 1950s, there have literally been millions of claims from people worldwide of being taken by extraterrestrial beings, often aboard a craft and into some kind of operating room where various invasive medical procedures are carried out. Some key similarities found in the majority of abduction claims include hours of missing time, gaps in memory, mysterious injuries or scars or implants, disorientation, reproductive issues, and other post-traumatic stress symptoms. On the other hand, there have been many reported cases of friendly contact encounters, but these cases do not usually include a forceful experience where they are taken against their will. Of the many cases and reports of alien abduction, the Betty Andreasson encounter of 1967 has stood the test of time and ridicule as one of the best documented accounts of mankind's encounter with beings not of our dimension. Countless websites and message boards actively discuss her case even today, and at least 5 books have been written, not only of her monumental abduction of 1967, but the ongoing alien contact involving Betty and other family members. Tonight, you will be amazed by this particular alien abduction case, and it may possibly change your doubting view of this phenomenon. Please help me in welcoming tonight Betty Andreasson Luca and Bob Luca to the show. How are you guys?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us on.
Hi,
hello
Betty.
to all your listeners. We're happy to be on Lucy's and Anthony's show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty, Bob. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Quite welcome. Our pleasure.
It's a pleasure to talk to you both. And we think it's vital that everyone hears your story. Now, can you
so much has been happening. So much has been happening to us. You know, it's not just one time where a lot of people have experienced the UFO phenomena, but it's continued in our life and at times wreaked havoc. But, I mean, there's so much going on that people are not are unaware of, you know, and it's due time that people wake up and see what is happening.
I think what she's trying to say also is that there's more than just the abduction. There's many things that follow it, like harassment by the government and a plethora of paranormal events that, in our case, has been witnessed by many other people. It's just totally unexplainable, and it just seems to follow the abduction experience.
Right.
Well, we want to get into that, but right now we'd like to start with, can you share with everyone a little bit about where you grew up and what life was like for you before these encounters began?
Sure. Well, the first unusual experience I had, I was only 7 years old, and I was living in Leominster, Massachusetts, and my brother had made a little hut out in the front of the yard, and I was out there with my dolls, and I was eating some crackers. I was waiting for my friend Dee Dee to come over and play dolls with me, when suddenly a bumblebee, I thought it was a bumblebee, came into the hut and was zipping around me, and it was really like a bright light. I wasn't, familiar with that. I just thought it was a bumblebee, and I dropped the crackers because I was afraid that's what it was after. And then I saw the ball of light, and it landed right between my eyes, and it stung. It held on and stung. And while I was there, I heard voices speaking, and it was multiple, and they said, the wee little one is coming along fine. So evidently, they had been watching me for a long period of time, and that was the very first unusual experience I had at such a young age. And I'm sure there are a lot of children that this is happening to, only they don't dare to say anything, because I never said anything about it except to Dee Dee when she came over. And she felt at my forehead and said, it didn't look like I got bit by a bee.
Mm. Well, when you had that first encounter with the UFO, did you get any kind of knowledge, or did you know anything about UFOs at that time?
No, I had no idea. It was at 12 years old. I was sort of a tomboy, and at that time we had moved to Westminster, Massachusetts. And it was a farmhouse, and there was some traps there, foot traps. And so I thought, I'm going to put one up into the woods because I had seen a large hole there, and I thought, to see if the trap worked or not. Went to school, and the next day I went up the hill. I picked up some stones with me just in case because it's in the deep woods. And when I went into where the woods were, and I looked, I saw that the trap was gone and the big hole was there. However, there was this gray foam coming out of the hole. It looked sort of like a large wrinkled gray bee's nest. That's actually what the head looked like at first when it came out of the hole. And all of a sudden, there was a small being standing before me. I was amazed. And the thing was, he had touched something on his chest, and a button of something, and it flew out. A light hit me right between the eyes again. And I went down, and I was out, and I heard the multiple voices again, and the voices said, she's got another year to go. Evidently, they were tracking me, and I had another year to go. So the next time was at 13 years old. The very next year, I had an experience where I was walking up in the backyard, up the hill. I was going to go check the blackberries, and as I got halfway up the hill, I happened to look off to the right-hand side of the house, and the moon was out. At least it looked like the moon to me, but it was getting bigger and it was coming closer and closer to me. And at that time, all of a sudden, I was in a real bright white room, and there were these small beings with the large heads, the black eyes, and they were wearing white suits, and I was scared. I was wondering what is going on. Well, it was at this time that they took me, and I went through different things that occurred, and what they really wanted to do was put an implant in me, and that's what happened at that particular time. And I was only 13 years old. And then later, when I turned 30, is when the adult experience happened.
Did you realize they were putting an implant in you?
Oh, yeah. They had me on the table, and they were doing their work. Yeah, I knew that something was going on because they had taken me into the one room, and they says, "We have something for you." One of the beings said, "We have something for you." And he showed me, and they were like, it was like a magnified shelf, and I could see like little beads and slivers, silver slivers there. And I thought, I don't want those. What good are those? And then later on, I was taken into an area, and there were other beings there dressed in silver suits, and that's when it's frightening, but what they did was they removed my right eye, and they went inside and evidently left some of those BBs or those silver little needles or whatever they were, and that's what happened to me, where I had the first implant, and it would show up many years later in 1967.
That's an amazing piece of story, Betty. The story of, and I've sort of heard this on interviews and such, the relationship between you and Bob, it sort of wasn't by chance. And Bob, maybe you can answer this. What is it that you think of that sort of may have brought you and Betty together? Was it the UFO phenomenon and the experiences that you both had?
Absolutely. Actually, I met Betty in 1977, and unknown to me at the time, that journey had started in 1944. I was only 5 years old. It was during the Second World War. My dad was overseas. My mom and I were living with my grandmother. And I was on a swing set out in the backyard that my uncles had put up for me. And I saw a light in the sky, and it came closer and closer and closer, and finally it stopped above and to the left of my swing set, and it kind of wobbled. It would be what you'd describe as a typical saucer-shaped object with a glass or plexiglass dome, transparent dome on top. And inside it, I could see what today would be described as the Greys. Then I described them as two little people. This thing tipped slightly, and a very thin beam of white light came out, and it struck me right in the forehead between the eyes, and I was frozen on my swing set, literally paralyzed. And I heard a voice, and what it said was that they had visited many, many people, even at that time, and this is 1944, and they said that they were preparing something that would be good for mankind, and that people they had visited, like they were visiting me at the time, would meet others in the future that had seen them and not be frightened. So that was basically what happened at 5 years old. But later, years later, when I underwent hypnosis, I got some confirmation in two forms. One, during the war, we had a victory garden, like many people. Nothing would grow under that area where this thing had stopped. Not even grass, not even weeds. The second confirmation I got was police officer Larry Fawcett, one of the investigators, decided to bring in a psychic, and she took she did psychometry. She took my penknife, which I had on me pretty much all the time, and she described exactly what happened to me. Even I'd never met this woman before, right down to the thin pencil beam light that struck me. And she said, in the backyard there are pipes and vines. And I said, nah, she's wrong. There was no pipes and vines back there. Well, later on, I had talked to my mother, and it turns out my grandfather had built a pipe arbor for grapes, so there was grapevine. I didn't even remember that there was pipes and vines back there. Then, in 1967, I was on my way to the shore, and a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. I came to an area known as the New Haven Trap Rock, and as I crossed the railroad tracks, the railroad spur that went into the quarry, there were 5 men working on that track, but they were not working. They were all looking up in the sky. So I looked up to see what the attraction was, and I saw 2 huge cigar-shaped objects. They were very bright, reflecting in the sunlight. And so I pulled over. I had to watch this. I knew that these obviously were not airplanes. They had no wings, no tail section. It was just like a huge fuselage. They made no noise, left no trail. And as I was watching them, both of the big ones were headed toward New Haven, Connecticut, from where I was. As I was watching them, 2 smaller ones dropped out of these large craft, and what dropped out of them was your typical saucer shape. One went off toward New Haven, one went in the opposite direction. So, being very interested, I watched till they were out of sight, and then I resumed my trip to the beach. This is approximately 11 o'clock in the morning. I resumed my trip to the beach. I got a couple of miles down the road, and this is a very rural area. There were no houses there at the time. And one of these craft came back, and it started to come down over a pasture on the left-hand side, and it fell with like a floating leaf motion, just came down very gently, stopped several feet above the ground. Now, this is all conscious memory. I looked at this thing, and all of a sudden there was a very intense burst of intense red light, almost like a ruby laser, very intense red light. And suddenly, somehow, I was inside this thing. There was a typical gray inside with a red uniform. It had a yellow lightning bolt on the left-hand side of the chest. He was joined by 4 others, and I was told to remove my clothing, which I did, mostly out of fear. It's a very strange environment. I was put on a table that I could only liken to perhaps plexiglass, but it didn't feel as hard as plexiglass, but it was kind of transparent like that. They examined me from head to foot. They took samples of skin. They took samples of my nails. They took sperm. I was scanned with an instrument that I can only liken to perhaps a modern-day X-ray. It covered me from head to foot several times. And the interesting thing was it gave off a pinkish-white light that actually came out of the machine, almost like sparks from a sparkler. So that scanned me, I assume, examining my innards. I really don't know what it was for. And then something happened that really freaked me out. One of these beings was walking by me, and he turned from a solid physical entity into a being of pure light. He was no longer solid. Now, while this was going on, I was indicating that, I want to get out of here. I'm frightened. And they said to me mentally that I was not going to be harmed. I shouldn't be worried. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm not going to be harmed, but I'm stuck on this table. And the interesting thing about the table was there were no restraints, but I couldn't move. It was almost like somebody put super glue on the whole length of my back, and I could not move on this table. Well, I was put back in my car when they were done with me and resumed my trip to the beach, only remembering that I had seen these things. I got to the beach, and I lost 2.5 to 3 hours. I was wondering, I was hungry when I got there, and I was only about 30 to 40 minutes from the beach.
Muted.
Yeah. So, you know, the time was lost, and I didn't know for years later what happened. I had talked to one of my best friends, a police officer, and my parents, and I told no one else, because in 1967 I didn't want to end up in an asylum or a psychiatrist's office.
Mm-hmm.
But how this led me to Betty, also I have to put in, I was a hard-working guy. I put in a lot of hours, and at the time, in 1977, I was working as a service manager for a new car dealership. Now, I was a single guy. I had a new car every 3 months. I had a great salary and a lot of perks with this job. And my friend, Eddie, approached me one day. He said, you know, he says, I'm looking for some work. He said, maybe in a different part of the country. And we were living in Connecticut at the time. He says, how about you take a trip with me and we look around? So I said, okay. And then we figured out to do what we wanted to do was going to take about a month. So I went to my boss, and I told him, I said, look, Bob, I said, I'd like to take a month off and take this trip. And he said, well, I can't do that. He said, I can't let you go for that long. Well, I thought about it, and over the weekend I thought about it. I came in on Monday, and I said, you know, Bob, I said, there's only 3 things I can see that we can do. I said, you can let me go, you can fire me, or I can quit. But I'm going to take this trip. Now, that was not like me at all. If you knew me, I mean, I was very faithful to my job. He decided to let me go. And after Eddie and I had been around through Texas, California, Washington, Oregon, we were headed back, and I think it was in Iowa, if I remember correctly. We were at a rest area. And on the spur of the moment, we decided that we are going to Florida. So several thousand miles out of our way, because we were headed back to Connecticut at the time. We got to Florida, and Eddie had a sister-in-law there in Pompano Beach. So we went to her place. We pulled our camp trailer onto her property and stayed there. And the second night we were there, she was mentioning that she worked with a woman that had a UFO experience. And I said, wow, that's interesting. I said, I'd really like to meet this person and talk to her, because for years I'd kept this bottled up inside myself. So she told me where Betty worked, and I went down the next evening to see Betty, but she wouldn't talk to me. Ray Fowler had warned her that reporters would be after her because he was working on the book at the time, and he instructed her not to talk to anyone. So absolutely, she would not talk to me. I mean, she gave me a hard time. Finally, I convinced her, look, I'm not a reporter. I've had this experience. It would be nice to talk to somebody that, you know, isn't going to be filled with ridicule and doubt and whatnot. So finally, I made a date with her for the following day to take her out for lunch. And from that point on, I've been buying her lunch ever since. That's how that worked out.
Now, that was in 1944. He's 2 years younger than me, but 1944, we both had the childhood experience. And then in 1967, we had the adult experience. And then we also had together a 1978 experience. Yes, but my experience afterward, I was living in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. I was married, of course, to my first husband. However, he was in the hospital. He had an auto accident, and so I had already given birth to 7 children. I had 7 children there. So my mother and father came to stay with me while my husband was in the hospital, because I had to go back and forth and back and forth. And while they were there, it was in the evening, and the kids were watching television, and all of a sudden the power went out. And we saw a reddish-orange flashing light coming through the pantry window, through the kitchen, and into the living room where we were all sitting. Well, my father, of course, was thinking it must be the police or fire department, And so he got up right away, and I didn't realize it, but he went out into the kitchen and pantry area. And meanwhile, I tried to calm the kids down and told them to keep still, and we'll find out what it was. Well, then I entered the kitchen, and as I entered the kitchen, all of a sudden, there were 5 strange beings coming right through the wooden door and standing in front of me. Now, the thing was, they had the large head with the big black eyes, and they were wearing a blue suit and had a sash over the chest and a belt. The thing was, right away I was thinking, what could this possibly be? It was frightening at first, but then all of a sudden I started to hear scripture in my head, and it said, entertain the strangers, for it may be angels unaware. So I thought, this has to be angels that walked right through the wooden door without opening it. And so anyway, they began to converse with me through my mind, and it sounded like they wanted something to eat. And so I went to the refrigerator, got some meat, took the frying pan, I was cooking it on the stove, and there was a little bit of smoke going up, and the leader jumped back as if, what's going on? And then he talked with me through the mind again and said, no, they wanted knowledge tried by fire. And I thought, that's got to be the Bible, because it's been around so long. It's been tried hundreds of years. And so we went into the living room, and I could see my mother and my 7 children were all sitting on the couch there, and they were in a state of suspended animation, and I'm wondering what is going on. At that point, I thought, well, I reached down to the end table where I had a Bible, and I thought this would be what you're looking for, and I passed it to the leader. He said his name was Quasga. He held out his hand, took the book, and when he did, I could see for his hand he only had 3 fingers. And he held the book in his hand, and he waved his other hand over it, and 3 other books appeared, small books, and he passed them to those that were beside him, the 3 other beings. And they took them in their hand. They didn't bother to open the pages. The pages just moved one after another, and it was no print in the new books that he had made. It was like bright white light, and it seemed to me as if they were not reading it, but devouring it with their eyes, the way they looked at it. And at that point, then the leader gave me a thin blue book. But I was worried about my children and my mother being so still there, and he could tell what was going on in my mind. And he took my daughter Rebecca out of that state, and she stood up. She couldn't move all around, but she stood up and she could watch what was going on. And she saw the exchange of the books there after. And so what happened is many days later, she came to me and she says, Mama, I am afraid. I've been having a terrible dream for 3 or 4 days about these strange people that are in our house. And I knew she must have seen the beings there and the exchange of books. And so I wasn't supposed to show anybody. I had put it in my bedroom in the closet on the shelf, and I would look at it through the few days that I did have it. And so I said, shh, don't say anything, Becky, because you'll frighten your brothers and sisters, And so I told her, come in the bedroom with me and I'll show you it. And so I took it down from the closet, and I let her see it, touch it, and when she touched it, she withdrew her hand, and there were sparkles all through her hand from just touching the top of the thin blue book. And the thing was, what's strange is, many years later, she started to be able to write in their strange language. I have written in their strange language as well. They must have given that to me as well. But Becky is able to do it with just put a paper down, and she can just write away with their strange, unusual language. But that's what happened then. Actually, it was my father that had seen them first. And the thing was, he had seen them hopping down the hill, because the craft was in the back and it was parked there. They were hopping down the hill, and then they entered in through the porch and right through the wooden kitchen door where I was standing. And I did not see my father there because the pantry is such, we had the kitchen, and then there was a half wall there, and there was a window in back of that half wall, but the window where we saw all the bright red light coming into the home was toward the back. So I did not know my father had been there. But anyway, he actually had been the first to see them and, coming to the house. And the investigators, I had gone under regressive hypnosis for some of this information to come forward, and the investigators asked if they could talk with my father because I knew that he had seen it. And the thing was, he didn't want to get involved because he was afraid of his Social Security, that it might be taken away from him by the government or something, by telling what he saw. And I said, Daddy, I need to have help here. You saw it. You know what happened. You saw the little beings coming. And so he finally did speak with the investigators and let them know what had happened, what he had seen. Of course, I was later taken out of my home and brought in the backyard, and we stood there on the slight hill, and there was the craft. And as we were standing there, the leader raised his hand and moved it to the side, and when he did, the whole bottom of the craft became transparent, the outer part, and I could see the workings inside that lower part of the craft. And it was very strange because there were these huge crystal balls. There were three things like this there. There were huge bottom of the stemmed thing was crystal balls, and then a metal things that clasped onto that and went up high, and there was another crystal smaller ball there, and a matter of fact I could see like sticks of light coming out of it. It wasn't just blaring out light. It was like actual separate sticks of light. It sort of looked like a cartoon, to see those bright bars of light just sticking out. And what was attached to the stem, the metallic stem, was two armatures that came out, and it had a crystal wheel within those armatures. And that crystal wheel evidently rode around. There was like a big tube underneath this craft, with these three strange machines that were there. But that is what happened at that time. And then, of course, I was taken into the craft, and there was more that happened where they were going to check me out to see what was going on.
I'd like to Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd like to interject here. I know how strange this sounds to a lot of people, but before the Ray Fowler ever did the book, there was extensive background examinations, there was lie detector tests, psychological testing, psychiatric testing, and PSE, as I said, lie detector tests. All of this was done before any of this was made public, because I know how strange this sounds to a lot of your listeners.
Well, and I think people are hearing a little bit of an echo, so there may be an issue with our phone lines, and I apologize, both Lucy and I. But one of the interesting things that I caught when you were talking about your experience is that you had witnessed a symbol on, I think it was on the chest or on the arm, of a lightning bolt. And Betty, I know that you had mentioned a symbol that you caught on the sleeve of one of these beings.
Yeah, it was like a bird, like an eagle.
Do you think that there's any symbolism to that?
Unless it means their particular group of beings.
I thought maybe it was expressed or maybe explained.
Although I had that strange experience where I stood before an eagle, it was after they took me aboard the craft and we took off. What happened was they came to this place where we were on a track, and it was different beings, one in front of me, one in back of me, and we were moving along the track, and they took me to an area which was so bright. There was such light flashing all over the place, and it was very warm. And the two beings got off of the track, and I had to go ahead. And as I moved ahead, there was this huge eagle. To me, it looked like an eagle. It was humongous, and it had its wings down. And there was light flashing all in back of it. I mean, like the sun, streams of light flashing out of it. And it's, as I said, the wings were down and open, and I could see every little feather moving like it was alive, like the feathers were alive on its wings. After a while, it got so hot as I stood there. The thing was, I think I passed out. It got so hot because there were sparks of light going all over the place and everything, and the heat was so extreme. Because the next thing I remembered, I was standing there, and I could see it had turned. You know, this is so strange. I know a lot of people are probably thinking, what in the world is this all about? But there was a pile of ashes there, and evidently it was from the burned bird or whatever. And as I looked at the pile of ashes, a gray worm came out of them. Now, off to the left, there was a huge bright light, really bright light, and I think that was maybe part of what the eagle was holding back. But off to the left, on the side there was this huge bright light, and I heard a voice. And the voice called me twice and said, Betty, Betty, you have seen and you have heard. Do you understand? And I started crying. I didn't understand. I told him, I don't even know why I'm here. You know, what is going on? And the voice said, I have chosen you to show the world. Now, that's evidently why I've had so many different encounters with the beings. And there's been, like you had mentioned earlier, 5 books written about the different experiences I've had. And now Bob and I have worked on a book because I've had one other experience that no one knows about, and we're going to be putting that in there so people can, there's a lot of people that have asked, has anything else happened? And so we felt, you know, people want to know what is going on. So, and the book is going to be titled Lifting the Veil. And I just finished my part of it, and Bob has his part in there as well. And hopefully that will be out so people can see what has gone on since that time. More personal. Yes, it is more personal because it is the story of our life as well.
Well, Betty, I do want to ask something. You came in contact with different kinds of beings.
Yes.
And there was one that was called the One.
Yes.
Now, one thing I was thinking about when I was reading all this, when they read the Bible, when they absorbed that info, do you think that made them appear like that because of what was in the Bible?
I really don't know. I haven't thought of that, but I mean, the One has been there where the beings have been. I mean, I've experienced and seen it, And this last experience I've had is with the One, and we will be showing a great deal of that information of who the One is and so forth.
Betty, when you last left off on your story, you talked about being taken up into the ship, and you sort of a little bit elaborated on some of the amazing crystal pieces and stuff that were visible that you saw. Was there any technology that they shared with you that may be strange to us?
Yes, they showed me some of their technology, and I tried to draw it down. We have it on our Facebook. Bob put it on our Facebook so people could see some of the information, that I had seen and drawn to try and remember as much as possible.
It's on all of the drawings, and a lot of the paintings are on our website, Andreassonaffair.com, along with a lot of the documents from the government and the problems that we've had with them as well. So if people are interested, they can go to the website, and it's much easier to look at a picture than it is to kind of try to describe some of this complex technology that was in the ship that Betty had drawn so well.
The one thing they did tell me that they used mercury and a gel for it, and Bob has found out a lot of information on that.
Apparently, some of our advanced craft are powered by or use liquid mercury rotating at a high rate of speed within an enclosed environment. And from what I've read scientifically, that is supposed to nullify gravity by approximately 89%. So it's strange that Betty saw this, that our scientists today are working with it, but even more strange is in the Indian, I can't pronounce, Marihabata, I think it is, some several thousand years ago, they described their craft, the Vimana, as being powered by rotating mercury. So I think that all ties together pretty well.
Wow.
Well, okay, so Betty, while all this was going on, I know you've mentioned kind of like their purpose here, without going into what the messages from the One are. What did they give to you? What did they tell you they're here for?
Well, they love mankind, but we've been walking in the wrong footsteps. That was some of the things they told me. They have they watch over nature and all natural form. They're doing different things without us realizing it, There were a few different things that they showed and told me about. I will be having that in the new book.
Well, I do have another question. Listening to some of the things you said about nature and some of the things they tried to warn us about. I'm Native American. A lot of the things that you said sounded very familiar to me. There are things that our elders have said about the earth, about, the things that we're doing wrong.
Right.
Have they been here before? Is it possible that the Native American elders have come in contact with them?
Oh, I believe so. Yes, Lucy. Yeah. Because they're the Native Americans are out there with nature, and they were keepers of nature in all natural form like that, and they were watching it. They did say that men would eventually become sterile, and we're already facing that problem.
Betty, you had mentioned, I think in another interview, about paranormal instances or occurrences that have happened after this incident, and maybe even possibly up to today. What kind of experiences are you dealing with? Is it spiritual? Is it other alien extraterrestrials? What could you talk about?
Well, the thing is, yeah, a lot of the information we'll have in the book about that.
Okay.
I was thinking on. I've got sinusitis right now, so it's hard for me to even think. But
I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there is. What was your question again? I'm terribly sorry over that. I've been
paranormal
fighting
experiences.
this for over a month.
Any paranormal experiences that you could share that
yes, what happened just recently. Well, the paranormal things that are happening within our home have been very strange. You know, now two psychics said we had two portals in our basement, one underneath the basement stairs and then one over by the door to the other side. And we would hear all sorts of things going on, but just recently. Now, and I think why it's what I'm going to tell you is happening now, because Bob took, what was it you took? And you put it so that he was trying to make sure that whatever was coming out of those portals would not be...
Oh, an EMF meter?
Yeah. And so he took sage and he burned that and he went through the rooms because we were having so much paranormal things happening. He just couldn't keep up with it. And he used that sage, and then after that he went into the basement, and in the name of Jesus Christ he tried to close the portals that nothing evil or bad would come through. But what has happened now, Bob had been looking at Google Earth because we have some property around here besides the home. But he wanted to see how our home looked on Google Earth. When he tuned into it, there was something strange out in the back of the yard by our deck, and it was half over in midair, half over our garage roof, and half over the deck. And it was a big, huge thing. It looked like silver white light and with a dark rim. And I think another two psychics said it was a portal. Now, the Google Earth captured that picture. We have that picture.
That's amazing.
There's another thing I'd like to mention. It's not just that we've experienced these things. They have been witnessed by one of the police investigators, Larry Fawcett, who was a police lieutenant, the psychiatrist who came to our home to do a follow-up visit on Betty. He came to our home. He was passing through town. He came to our home about 9:30 in the evening and stayed till 5:30 in the morning. Late at night, there was a huge crash inside the kitchen of the house that we all heard. We got up and looked. Nothing was moved. No one was there. There was no apparent reason. The psychiatrist witnessed that. Then about 5:30 in the morning when he was leaving, we were standing outside talking. It was just starting to get light. And there was a huge cigar-shaped cloud over our house. I would estimate this to be close to the length of a dragster, perhaps a quarter of a mile long. And it was very thick in the center, and then toward the edge, it kind of feathered out, and you could see a little bit of starlight through the edges, like a mist. So we're standing there, and he looked at me, and he said, "Did you see that?" He said, "Do you see that?" And I said, "Yeah, but I wasn't going to mention it until you saw it first." I didn't want him getting thinking that I was nuts. Also, things have turned up here like other people have heard voices and music and things in the house. So what I did, I took a digital recorder and I left it running overnight in the basement, and it did pick up these things. I also picked up a disembodied voice in our living room. I don't really have an explanation for this, but this is now, but way back in the beginning, when Betty and I were first married, we moved into a house in Meriden, Connecticut, and in that house, the lights would go off and on by themselves. The stove itself, sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, and electrically nothing wrong was found in that house. Also, we had shadow people. There was only one entrance to the basement from inside the house, and I saw a man going down the stairs into the basement. So I ran down after to see who it was. I got down there, and there was no one there at all. But one of the most amazing things that had happened, one morning Betty and I came down, the bedrooms were upstairs on the second floor. We came downstairs, and in the kitchen had crown molding. All of the crown molding from the four walls was on the floor. But the finishing nails that held it up were still in the wall. Also, the glasses in our cabinet looked like they had squiggly lines on them, almost like somebody had etched into the glass. And then there was a huge stainless steel pan that we use for like cooking spaghetti sauce and whatnot. And as you know, stainless steel is very tough.
Right.
Well, the very edge of it was rolled over on top, so you have a double layer of stainless steel, and that thing actually split. You could see the separation in it. That's just, to me, that seems to be that it would require an awful lot of energy to do something like that. Now, why did it happen? You know, who knows? But it's just one of those odd things that is unexplainable. We moved out of that house after a year, and we moved to another town, Cheshire, Connecticut. And whatever was there seemed to have followed us. The police officer, Larry Fawcett, and his wife were visiting us one day, and we were sitting having lunch. And against one wall of the house was an etagere with glass shelves. And there were liquor bottles on that shelf and some knickknacks and whatnot, and a little dinner bell that was all glass. Well, while we're sitting there eating, the dinner bell started to ring. Larry Fawcett jumped up immediately, went over to the shelf, and was amazed because you could see the bell was glass, so you could see the little clapper or whatever inside move, yet the liquid in the bottles on those shelves was totally undisturbed. So, again, there's no explanation. When the hypnosis sessions were being done, there were the investigators and the hypnotist, and several people had tape recorders. When the tape was played back, there was not only Betty speaking on there, but there was music. I mean, someone singing quite clearly. And nothing like, there was no radios on in the house, no television, nothing like that. On another tape, as they were interviewing Betty, there was a second voice coming along with her voice. And there was no explanation. We did take that tape to a lab, an audio lab, and they could not explain it. There was no normal explanation for that happening. Now, another thing with the paranormal, and I'm sure you people are probably going to recognize this, 3 a.m. It seemed like a lot of strange things happen at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
I had apparitions when we were in that Cheshire house. So I finally set the camera up at the opposite end of the room facing the head of the bed. And I put a remote on the camera and I pinned it right to my pillow. So every time I would see something or be awoken in the middle of the night, I'd set off the camera, and very clearly you could see the digital clock. It was between 3 and 3:03 a.m. Consistently. What I saw never showed up on the photographs, but what I did catch was, I can only describe it as like when you see heat rising from a highway, like, squiggly lines.
Right, yes.
That is what I captured on tape, on film. But nothing that I was seeing ever showed up, and to this day, I still see these things. I got concerned about it. I was wondering, did I have a brain tumor or something working like that? So I did go to our family doctor, and he sent me to the hospital. I had brain wave scans, and I had my brain x-rayed and whatnot, and my doctor was a comedian. He told me they had examined my head thoroughly and found nothing. So that gives you an idea of the kind of doctor I am. But he was a really good doctor, but he had quite a sense of humor.
That house that we lived in Meriden before Cheshire, Bob and I did have an experience together. It was in 1978, and the thing was, we were in our bedroom. I was in the bathroom and brushing my teeth. Bob was by the bed, taking off his socks, getting ready for bed. And all of a sudden, we heard this whirring like a circle, whir, 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 over the top of our room, over the roof. And I turned to look at Bob, and all of a sudden he came out of himself and rushed over to me, put both of his hands on the edges of the door, and then we started to go up, and he grabbed me, and so we're holding on together, and we're going up out of the house. This was in 78. And the thing was, I was taken to one place and Bob was taken to another aboard a ship. And I became a light being, and there were other light beings there. We were doing something with some small objects that we had. It seemed like a game, but evidently it had some meaning to it. Whereas Bob was taken over to the other side and with two elders, and he can tell you what happened with him.
Yeah, the elders were quite tall. I'm 6 foot, and I just barely came up maybe to their shoulders. And they were had very clear skin, blue eyes, and grayish or very light blondish or grayish hair. And they took me into a room and imparted what I can only describe as some knowledge to me. They talked about life and death. They talked about the fact that when your body dies, you do not. They talked about the importance of animals and that how people that abused animals would be surprised when they left this world to find out that there is a penalty for this, that the animals were very important, much more so than man realizes. Also that man is advancing technologically too fast and not fast enough spiritually. And apparently that's why we have some of the problems that we have today. But that's all in one of the, I believe the Watchers. There's about 7 pages of different things that they told me. And the interesting thing is the hypnotist and the investigators really didn't know what to make of this, because what came out was not me. At that time, I'd always been a technical guy. My work involved everything from automotive technician to computer technician, hydrogen fuel cell research technician. These are the kind of jobs that I did, so I always looked at everything in a nuts and bolts manner. However, after getting into this and seeing what happened, where Betty and I were taken, the only way I can describe it is taken out of our bodies, literally, I've had to change my thinking over the years and realize now that the spiritual world, well, let's say this, a lot of people refer to it as a spiritual world. Possibly it's just another dimension. Right. I know scientists are now leaning toward the theories that there are numerous dimensions. So I can't say. I don't know if I was in another dimension or if it was just us in the spirit, but I have had to change my thinking considerably when it came to that. Some of the other odd things that had happened to us, Betty and I were camping we had a 30-foot camp trailer. And during the day, I was working. Betty was visited by the gray beings. Now, when I came home from work, I opened the door and I immediately noticed there was an odor of burning insulation. Now, I'm very familiar with that because I've worked with a lot of electronics and whatnot. Well, we were in the camp trailer, and we had the electric water pump shut off because we were on the campground's water supply. I checked the trailer out and found that the water pump was burned out. The wiring going to it had melted, thus giving off the odor from the insulation. And where the trailer was parked, there was a huge maple tree behind it. On that maple tree, the leaves, the top of the leaves had turned brown, and the bottoms were still green. I could not get a hold of any of the specific investigators at the time, but I did get two electronics engineers that lived not too far away to come down, and they had no explanation for the effect on the tree or the water pump. Another way that electronics are affected specifically, Betty and I had driven to Florida, which we did often. Betty's sister lived in Pompano Beach. And on this occasion, we were making the trip. I usually made it from Connecticut to Florida nonstop. But this time there were accidents, there was construction, we got delayed after delay. I was on the road many hours. So we got as far as Lake Worth, Florida. And I knew in Lake Worth there was a campground where I had camped at prior to meeting Betty. And I said, look, let's get off, get a good night's sleep here, get a shower in the morning, and start out fresh. So we pulled into the campground, which was a KOA campground on Lake Worth Road. I went into the office to pay for a lot, and the people were discussing a UFO sighting that was in the area of the campground just the night before. Well, I didn't get involved in the conversation because I was just plain beat. I was tired by then. So I got our lot, and we went and parked. Now, the way the campground is set up, it's like a grid. And the way you park your vehicles is directly north and south, and then the roads run, of course, east and west. So the compass on the car is reading due north. We had parked the car. We had a car at that time that was a hatchback with the seats that folded down, so it made a reasonably comfortable bed. We were getting ready to settle in, and a ball of light, multifaceted, multicolored ball about the size of a navel orange, came through the driver's door, passed in front of us, and went out of the passenger side of the car. So, we'd seen so many strange things by then. We said, well, that was pretty interesting. So we get ready. We're going to settle in for the night. And along about midnight, I heard a car come up behind us. So I stuck my head up and looked out the window, and this car had parked at a 90-degree angle to us, not in the lot we were in, but actually just off the road. So I thought, well, these are probably people that are trying to beat the campground out of their fee, and didn't think anything more of it. I woke up again around 3 o'clock in the morning. I had to use the restroom, and that was about 20, 25 yards maybe from where the car was. So I walked to the restroom. Now I'm walking back, and I'm coming up behind this Cadillac. It's a black Cadillac, and it has New York plates on it, which I was familiar with because we lived in Connecticut. We saw them often. All of a sudden, all four doors of that car open as if one. I mean, you heard one noise, and these four guys get out, and they were, I guess, what you would describe as the Men in Black. They all had black suits, white shirts, black ties, and a thin-rimmed black hats. And this is 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, normally, I would have been a little concerned, but these guys were all Asian-looking, and I swear they looked like a good wind would have taken them out of the place. They were very, very thin. So I didn't look at them as any kind of threat, but I looked at them as very strange. As I was walking by the left side of their car, the four of them changed positions. They walked around the car much like kids play in musical chairs. They got back in the car, shut the doors exactly at the same moment. It sounded like one door closed. So I got back in the car to get the rest of the night's sleep, and I'm thinking, those guys are weird, whoever they are. Well, we get up in the morning, and the first thing I noticed when I got in the front seat, their compass is no longer pointing north. It's pointing almost east, a change of almost 90 degrees. And when I started the car, the radio the night before had been set by the radio station as far as the time. So the time was correct. But the time on that digital clock had advanced by 20 minutes. And again, electrical engineers that I had talked to said the only thing they could think of that might cause that would have been some kind of electromagnetic pulse. But Betty and I never felt anything or noticed anything other than that ball going through the car. So we're in Florida. I can't get a hold of an investigator. So the best I could do, I took a handheld compass and I walked around the car. Well, the metallic car obviously attracts the compass, and the compass points toward the car. Except when I got to the point where that ball had come through the door, the compass would spin totally away from the car, 180 degrees, even when I was as much as 4 and 5 feet away from the car. And I did take pictures of the compass in my hand as I walked around the car, because it's just, I wish we could get a hold of somebody at the time, like maybe a physics professor or something like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. You can't always get a hold of somebody when you'd like to for something like that. Right. That's just a couple of the paranormal experiences that we had, and there were many, many.
Yeah, also in that 1967 encounter that I had, Bob had one in 1967, as he told you, but I was taken aboard their craft, and I was made to change into a garment. I was taken into another room, and as I told you, at 13, they had put implants in within me, and when I was in 1967 in their craft, they put me on a table, and they used a needle, and they went up into my left nostril, and they pulled out what I think is one of those BBs that they had put in me at 13 years of age. They also checked me for procreation, and when they put the the needle in to my navel, I could feel it as it moved around, and the leader, Quasgar, he felt something was wrong. Two of the other beings had this roll of cloth or something, woven cloth, and they were looking at it as if it was keeping track of something. And he says, something is missing. And, of course, I had a hysterectomy. I told him I had a hysterectomy. And evidently he saw that I could not become pregnant any longer. So that must be why he felt something was missing. However, I did have a hysterectomy because of the fact I was had a little bit of cancer around the mouth of the cervix, but I found out also that I was pregnant about 2 months, and that was very shocking to me. I don't know if something was put there because I was not aware I was pregnant all that time. It was after I had to go in and have the operation that I found out about it.
Well, Betty, you mentioned Quasda. Now, in these different encounters, did you come in contact with the same leader, the same people?
Well, the people seem the same. They seem to look the same and everything. However, I don't know if it was Quasgar. I never really asked, if it was Quasgar again, because there were so many different times that I was taken, that they looked very much alike.
That was the case with me as well. They looked like they all came out of the same cookie cutter. I mean, it was just, amazing, but they were all identical.
Except for their height. Sometimes they were small beings, about 3 feet tall, and then some were 5 feet. And the elders were very tall.
There is one thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was going to say there's one thing I want to mention because this was funny as well as shocking. We were in an IHOP restaurant in Florida, and there were 4 other people with us. We stopped in for a coffee and a snack, and Betty got her coffee, and she's stirring the coffee with her spoon after she put sugar in. She picks up the spoon, and the bowl of the spoon fell off into the coffee. So something is at work here. So we obviously took the spoon from the restaurant, gave it to Raymond Fowler. He gave it to a metallurgist, and they did a study of it and could find no logical reason why that spoon would just break off like that.
It couldn't have been the hot coffee because I held the spoon, by the handle in my hand as we were all talking there, and then all of a sudden, plunk, it went down, and everybody goes, everybody breathed heavily.
Yeah, things like that. Betty had a problem with the car keys, did that too. They bent in her hands, and
yes.
She just pulled them to straighten them back out.
Yeah, I was so upset. I was supposed to go and pick up Bob, and the key, when I took it out of the ignition, somehow it had bent, and I was so upset over it because I had to go pick him up. I started stroking the key with my fingers, and as I did, it straightened the key out, so I was able to use it. So a lot of strange things happened to us.
I think they left her with some psychic ability or psychokinetic ability, and I'll tell you this was very strange. I was getting my pilot's license, and I had my solo license, which meant I could fly myself, but I had not passed to take passengers yet. Well, I flew from the airport where I was training to another airport in Meriden, and I picked Betty up. And I says, we'll go for a nice ride today. Well, she gets all worried about it. I get up in the airplane. We're in Connecticut. We head up into Massachusetts. A beautiful day, a lot of country to look at, beautiful landscape. All of a sudden, everything electronic in the airplane quits. Now,
I wasn't supposed to be on that plane.
You depend, in those days, we didn't have GPS, so we depended on omnidirectional radio beacons. My radio went out. My compass went out. I couldn't get the omnidirectional beacon. So now she's getting scared. She thinks we're headed into Canada.
Only because I wasn't supposed to be on until he had his license. I wasn't supposed to be on the craft.
But everybody does it. So anyway,
right.
To make a long story short, I knew that we were west of the Connecticut River, so I just headed east toward the sun until we hit the river, and I followed the river back and then dropped her off at the airport in Meriden. When I dropped her off at the airport, everything started working again. So I flew back to the Goodspeed Airport, which is where I got the airplane out of, and never mentioned to them that everything had quit in the meantime. But I think there's some kind of psychic ability or something that had happened to her from the abduction experiences.
Well, the recent thing, Bob had... We have so much of the paranormal things happening off and on, too. Bob had set up a camera in our bedroom on the big bureau that is off to the... You can look from that bureau right out into the hallway. Well, I get up during the night to go to the bathroom, and, of course, the picture was there. Well, when I returned back again, there's these balls of light about the size of oranges are zipping around my head. There's 3 balls of light, and he's got it captured on the camera.
That's video, not still.
Right.
That's video camera.
So what they are, I don't know.
Now, there's another segment that we haven't touched on yet, which is a lot of people seem to get very interested in us when the book was about ready to be published, and that was the people that we give all our tax dollars to. When the book first was getting ready to be published, it was not out yet, but we noticed that we were seeing these black Huey UH-1 helicopters, and they were overflying our house on a regular basis, and they had no ID numbers. Now, I knew enough about federal regulations then. I know they have to have ID numbers. These did not.
Right.
So the flights got so low and so frequent that our next-door neighbor, who was a town councilwoman, began to document the times of the flights and everything. They'd rattle the windows in the house. Well, I thought it was unusual, and I wrote Ray Fowler, and he said, well, you're probably in a flight path. So I didn't think so, but I said, oh, okay. Well, we moved out of that house in a year in Meriden, and we moved to Cheshire, Connecticut. When we got to Cheshire, Connecticut, the helicopters came with us, but it wasn't just the helicopters. Betty and I were at the closing. We had the key to the house. The two girls were dropped off at school and told to go to the house after school. When they got there, someone was already inside the house, even though we still had the key and the house was left locked. The person in the house said that they were from the phone company. So, okay. I don't know why they had to be inside, but that was the story. Well, shortly after, Betty was contacted by a representative from the United Nations, and she was asked to write out her complete story and give him a signed statement. And I still have the man's card and address and everything today. Then the helicopters started coming over the house in Cheshire on a regular basis, several times a week. There were two types. There were the Huey UH-1s and the Sikorsky Blackhawks. And when I say they came over low, I could have taken a stone, a baseball, whatever, and hit them. Now, federal aviation regulations state they can fly low, but they have to be 500 feet laterally from buildings. And yet these went right over our house. This was a form of harassment. And when we were out in Phoenix, Arizona, we were doing a lecture, and I was showing slides of the helicopters and whatnot, and this fellow approached me during a break. He was obviously military, short crew-cut hair, shirt buttoned straight down so the buttons were exactly even with his belt buckle, highly polished black shoes. And he said, he pulled me aside, it was just he and I there, and he said, look, we're only sending the helicopters so we don't have to hurt you. I said, okay, thank you. And another occasion, we're at the MIT in Massachusetts, we were doing a lecture. And Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who anyone in the UFO field will recognize that name, came walking over to Betty during a break, because at that time I was pushing the military very hard with freedom of information. I was calling the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, and he didn't even have a conversation. He walked up to Betty, he says, stick to philosophy, leave the military out of this, and he walked off. So what happened was the military was interested in us because of we were talking and we weren't being quiet like they wanted. But what made matters much worse, while we were living in Cheshire in 1982, there was an article about Betty and I in a Hartford Courant newspaper. I got a phone call from a young man that said he had had an experience with UFOs while in the military. And he said he'd like to talk about it. Well, I didn't know if I was being scammed or, if the guy, he sounded kind of kooky, but he explained he had just had dental surgery. So I said, okay. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, asked him to meet us at our house, and he did. He showed up at our house a couple of days later. His name was Larry Warren. He was the very first one to come forward with the information about the Bentwaters incident, and Betty and I were the first to interview him. So we put him in touch. After he told us everything that had happened at Bentwaters, we put him in touch with Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, because they had the resources that I didn't. They had access to attorneys, investigators, and whatnot. Well, obviously today, people know the story is very much true. And it caused a big stir in England because the United States had an agreement with England that they would not have nuclear weapons there. And this UFO was scanning the bunkers where the nuclear weapons were kept. Larry was warned not to talk about this while he was in the military. One night he's in his hometown of Southington, Connecticut. He gets attacked by a guy and worked over with a pipe.
Yeah, that's so
they did a number on him. And I had written to the British Ministry of Defense at the time and filed on the U.S. Air Force. The Ministry of Defense said it was a hoax, which just shows you the length that government goes to, they'll lie or whatever, to prevent this stuff from coming out. The Air Force said it was a non-incident and there was nothing to investigate. But because we now were responsible for getting the story out with Larry, the intensity of what they did to us increased. They had already started. We had yearly tax audits. And in these tax audits, it was so obvious it was harassment that our CPA literally got into shouting matches with the auditor at the IRS. They asked me to produce documents that were 12 years old. And at least I'm bright enough to know that after 7 years, I didn't have to furnish them. So I was told they wanted these documents, and I said, no. I said, I don't have to give you those. And the examiner said, well, look. He said, I can audit your ex-wife and get this information. Well, you see, at the time, my ex-wife and I didn't get along too well, so I suggested that he get busy and start auditing then. She was not too happy about that. But also, they tapped our telephone, and when we were out, and it doesn't matter if we were in New Hampshire, in Connecticut, in Florida, we would be followed by these cars. And let me go back a little bit. As a young man, I built race cars, and I was a street racer because there were no racetracks around where I lived. So I got pretty good at it. Well, these cars that had followed us, several times I was able to actually get behind them. And I got their license plate numbers. I gave them to Lieutenant Fawcett. He ran them through the police computers, and they came back as unissued. Now, it's not your average everyday Joe that's driving cars with unissued plates. It's usually the Organized Crime Bureau or FBI, CIA, somebody like that. They also went on a campaign to photograph us. Betty would be in a store shopping, and a helicopter is over the parking lot, and there's a man sitting in the helicopter with his feet actually out on the rail, and I'll let her explain to you what happened there.
Well, what happened was we were redoing the house, and I was going after wallpaper, and the thing was that it came right over they had big windows there, and they had like a book, a huge book that you just move page after page to check which wallpaper you were interested in. Well, I saw them photographing me. However, one of the clerks came running in. Oh, hey, they're photographing our store. What's going on? I knew what it was at that time. Another time, Bob had gone to a store, a gun store. He was thinking of getting a gun. I don't know what one it was. But he was inside there, and I was sitting out in the front in the car, and all of a sudden the black helicopter came over, and it hovered right over the gun shop, right toward the back. Somebody else had seen it as well.
That was seen, thank goodness, it was witnessed by a reporter for the Meriden Record newspaper. And what I'm thinking, they have, even back then, they had thermography. They could see through walls and buildings. I don't know if they wanted to see what I was buying or whatever, but there was a motion picture called Blue Thunder which demonstrated a lot of the technology they had. They could hear your normal conversation from 3,000 feet up using what they call a shotgun mic. They had thermography that they can look through the doors or walls of buildings. They had a whisper mode so the helicopter would not be noisy. And that was all technology that they had before this time.
Right. I also at times was receiving messages from the beings, and I'd write down exactly everything that they were saying, but we'd hear the whop, 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 the helicopter coming right away. So they had to have listened in our home, plus were checking whenever something like that was going on, and very often it would end the conversation that they were having with me or telling me about.
They also had some interesting technology that they were using because, and we have numerous witnesses for this, Betty and I had done some lectures, some private lectures for people that were interested in the phenomena. And we were at the house of a psychologist in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. There was a group of about 20 people. Betty had just finished speaking, and I just started talking about the helicopters. All of a sudden, you hear the familiar whop, whop, whop of the rotor blades. We look out the windows, and here's a helicopter slowly coming around the house. And this was bad weather. It was raining like crazy. So apparently they knew when I started speaking. Well, either that or it was a coincidence. Several weeks later, we were doing a lecture in New Britain, Connecticut for a dentist and his group. I started talking about the helicopters. Boom, one shows up. Well, now it's a little more than coincidence.
Right.
A few weeks later, we were doing a lecture for a contractor in Meriden, Connecticut. The same thing happened. So they had tabs on us pretty good. Now, you get to a point where enough is enough. And if anybody that knows me knows I have a sense of humor. Well, I had a friend that was gotten out of the military, and his name was Tom, and he said, we'll have some fun with these guys. He built me an exact replica of a surface-to-air missile. It was approximately 7.5 or 8 feet tall, as I remember, and it was an exact replica of missiles that the U.S. military was using for surface-to-air. So we just waited a few days, and sooner or later we heard that familiar sound of a helicopter approaching our house from the north. Now, I had flown over the house myself, so I knew exactly what he saw and when he saw it, but he was extremely low. So he would have to almost clear our roof before he could see into the backyard. So we set this missile up on a cement pad in the backyard and waited. Sure enough, he cleared the roof. All of a sudden, that helicopter went sideways. We were staring at the bottom of it, and he whipped around in a very sharp circle in an evasive maneuver. And I told Betty, I said, this fellow's going to be headed back to base to get a shower and a change of clothes. Well, enough is enough. They had come over us. We're traveling on Route 2 in Massachusetts, which is a very rural area. 2 helicopters were down a hill. They were black Hueys. As we went by, they came up over the hill. Both of them passed over our car at an altitude of about 50 to 60 feet. Now, if you don't think that's intimidating, the whole thing was to try to scare us. But, as I said, I have a sense of humor, and Betty doesn't have any fear about stuff like that. So I took some of the pictures I took at our home in Cheshire, and I had them blown up to 20 by 40 by Kodak. Now, the interesting thing was I sent them to Kodak in Boston, Massachusetts to have them made into posters. I got them back 6 weeks later with a postmark of Washington, D.C. So, okay, somebody wanted to see what I was taking pictures of. I put them on national television, and lo and behold, for about 10 days to 2 weeks, we didn't see another helicopter. But unfortunately, they did start up again.
The thing was also we had problems with our telephone. One time my mother was sick, and I went to try to call her to make sure she was all right, and they had the line open. And I screamed on there, "My mother is ill. I wanted to speak with my mother. You're on the phone. Put the phone back, and so it opened up immediately. Another time, I was home by myself, and I thought, I think I'll get a job. So I got a job updating the city directory in Meriden, was it? No, it was Cheshire. And what happened, there's 6 of us girls in there, and, taking phone calls, getting as much information as possible to put in the books. Well, all of a sudden, the salesman, a young man, came into where we were, and he was all shook up. And we asked him, what's the matter? And he says, you're not going to believe this. He says, I have to call the office maybe several times a day to speak with the boss, he said. And he says, I dialed the phone, and I got the Pentagon. And I thought, uh-oh. They all turned and looked at me because they had known about my experience. And so anyway, I said, would you be willing to write it down, what you saw, and sign it? And he said, yes, and he did. Also, the boss was telling me he's never had so many telephone people coming in there to change the phones and change different things. And one of them said they had to fix a froggy on it. Now, whatever that was, I think that was ridiculous. But anyway, our telephone also, we will be speaking on the phone, and the one on the other side will hang up, and you will hear your words repeated. So they're recording it. And matter of fact, Bob had that happen with Larry Fawcett, the police officer.
Yeah, they actually got a little bit nasty with us for a while. We didn't mind the helicopters so much. And the IRS harassment. After a while with the IRS, I just overpaid our taxes, and when they called us in, they had to give us money back. After that, the IRS left us alone. But what they did was to intimidate. We had to go to Chicago from Connecticut, and we were at the airport, and I went to the desk. Larry Fawcett was meeting us there. He was already there. I went to the desk, and the guy says, Mr. Luca has already boarded the plane. So I thought, well, somebody with the same name. And I said, no, I'm Mr. Luca from Spring Street in Cheshire, Connecticut. And he said, yeah, he's already boarded the plane. So I said, oh, okay, this is their way of letting you know that they got an eyeball on you. On another occasion, Betty and I were, again, on our way to Florida. We got tired. We stopped at a campground on the northern part of Florida, up around Cape Canaveral. And we got a message. Somebody from the office came up and told Betty that her son has called. Well, that's impossible because we didn't tell anybody where we were going. Nobody knew that we were there, and yet she gets this message that her son had called, which, was totally bogus.
True.
But this was their way of kind of trying to keep you under their thumb and instill fear in you. So we turned it around a little bit. I called the CIA, and I told them that we were doing a book and we wanted an interview. Well, they wouldn't grant us one. We did a 3 or 4 part news series on the 6 o'clock news in Connecticut, and I mentioned the FBI had been investigating UFOs and all, and the FBI gave a statement and said basically that Betty and I were full of baloney, that they didn't do that. So I challenged the FBI on the air to do a show with us discussing not what happened to us, but their documents, which I had obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. And then all of a sudden they weren't so interested anymore. Then we went to Cape Canaveral, or Cape Kennedy, and we met the guard at the gate, and we told him we were doing a book, and we were there for an interview with the administrator. We got the okay. We walked down to the administrator's office, which was quite a walk from where we had entered. And when we got there, we were met by a visibly shaken secretary that said he was no longer in. Now, he was there 5 minutes ago. So here we are, just 2 average people, and these government agencies are afraid, literally, to confront us on what the information we had. Now, I'm going to move up to just recently. I worked for a while as a computer technician, and I had some very good software, security software in my computer, and my computer was hacked. It was hacked by the United States Navy Space Weapons Division. 48 hours later, it was hacked by the United States Army. Well, my software gave me the physical street address, the computer ID, the operators of the computer, I mean, everything you could want. So I wrote to the Army and Navy Inspector Generals, asked them what's up, why are you trying to get into my computer? They admitted that the computers I named were theirs. Obviously, there's no way that I could know if it didn't show up on my software. And they said an investigation would be done. Well, that never happened. So I finally had enough. I wrote to the United States Attorney General's office, and they informed me that that came under the jurisdiction of the FBI. So I wrote the FBI, and I told them that I would like them to investigate the hacking of my computer by the Department of Defense and those two specific departments, the Navy and the Army. They have, not only did they refuse, but the second letter I wrote them, 6 months later, I sent certified mail with a return receipt. They would not even pick it up. It came back to me unopened. Now, they have time to investigate sports teams hacking each other's computer, which I don't think is anywhere near as important as the Department of Defense hacking a citizen's computer. They will not touch it. But we are not done yet, because I'm going to try to make this public in a big way and see if I can get something out of them. Now, the worst thing that they did to us, out of all the things that they'd done, one night Betty and I were asleep. The two girls had already left. They were in the military. And we were in our home in Cheshire. And I woke up, I don't know, it might have been 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I heard two distinct male voices in our kitchen. Now, there was the bedroom we were in, then there was a hallway, and the kitchen was right off to the right-hand side. We had a large dog, about a 100-pound shepherd. I looked at the bottom of the bed where he slept on the floor. The dog got up. He didn't bark. He got up, and his legs just slid out from under him, his front legs. He went right down on his face. So immediately I thought, oh, something's wrong here. So I reach in my nightstand for a pistol, and that was the last thing I remembered. Betty and I woke up in the morning, started to get dressed to go to our prospective jobs, and she said her left arm was hurting her. I said my right arm was hurting me, with a little sore, and we both had wicked headaches. I mean, very bad, almost like a migraine. So we went to work. We got home that night, and she said her arm had been hurting her all day. And I said the same thing that had happened to me. Now, I'm left-handed, and she's right-handed. Well, we took off our shirts. On my right arm, I had a black and blue mark about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches in diameter, with a very clear puncture mark right in the center of it. Betty had the same thing on her left arm. So apparently what happened, I've talked to people. I talked to our doctor. I asked him if we had gone right to the hospital, would a blood test have shown up anything, and he thought that it was too late, that nothing would have shown up by then in our blood. But what I was told, that the military has a sleep agent, and they could have put that in through the window, because I mean the windows were open in the bedroom, and that would have been enough to put us out and then come in and give us a shot while they either looked through the house for what they were looking for, or did whatever. You know, I have no clue what they did while they were in there, because I was out. But anyway, that resulted a little later on. Betty and I had decided to go to Florida. It was a very cold winter night, and we didn't tell anyone. We got up late after midnight, went over to my friend's house where I stored my camp trailer, hooked it up, and we went to Florida. That was on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning. Well, by Wednesday, 2 FBI agents show up at my job, and they want to know where we are. Well, the guys I work with couldn't tell them, because I didn't tell them. I never told people where we were going, because I didn't want them following us all over the place. So when we got back, we were told the FBI had been there, And Betty and I went to New Haven, Connecticut, to the Federal Building. We met with an agent who supposedly didn't know us when we walked in off the street, and he said that they could neither confirm nor deny that they were there. However, I have statements from my coworkers. In fact, they're even in Connecticut Magazine when they were interviewed, that these government guys were at my place of employment. They talked to my coworkers. They talked to my supervisor. Well, I figured while we were there, I asked the guy, I said, why are you people tapping our phone? And he said, well, I don't doubt that your phone is being tapped. He said, but it's not us. He says, in your case, it's Air Force intelligence. So my next thing, well, some months later, I got to talk to someone in Air Force intelligence, and they said, no, we'd have to get a court order and all. It's not us, it's the FBI. So that's how you get exactly nowhere when you're trying to get information out of the government.
Jeez.
For some, they are so frightened of this stuff coming out. And you know, if you look at statements made by people in the know, like, well, Herman Oberth, most people know him. He was actually the one that taught Warner von Braun. And he said that they had help in the scientific developments that they had made. And when they asked help from where, he said help from the people that come from other worlds. Werner von Braun made a statement. Everybody knows he's the guy basically that got us to the moon. Right. And in a magazine article, he said, we have found that extraterrestrial powers exist, and they are much more powerful than previously thought. He also added, I'm not authorized to give you any more details for this issue. And then we get down to Ben Rich, who was the head of Skunk Works. Now, that's where our most advanced technology comes out of. Stealth aircraft, of course, that's old now. But, I mean, the developments that they have made there are fantastic. Ben Rich, before he died, made a couple of statements that are earth-shattering, and I'm sure the government is not happy with this fact. For one thing, he said, we already have the means to travel among the stars. He said, but these technologies are so locked up in Black Project, it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. So that was one. The second statement he made, he said there's two types of UFOs, the ones we build and the ones they build. Now, here's a guy that is absolutely in a position to know, and they have done everything they can to bury this, except there were witnesses when he gave these statements, and thank goodness they have been documented and written down. So that's why people like us are attacked by the government, for the simple reason they do not want technology like this out to the public. And there's another example I'm going to give you that's a little more earthly. When we were in Florida, I worked at one place. I was a research technician on hydrogen fuel cells. This company developed a beautiful unit for your home. It was the size of a refrigerator. You put it in your basement. The thing had no moving parts. There was a filter that needed to be changed once a year. It made heat, hot water, and electricity. Now, if you put this in your home, obviously you're not going to have to buy heating oil. You didn't have to stay connected to the grid if you didn't want to. And this thing had been thoroughly tested. And as I say, this is first-hand information. I worked on these fuel cells. So they had a factory that they were looking at to go into production. In other words, the testing period was done. Along comes ExxonMobil. All of a sudden, we go into work one morning. There's a sign on the door. All employees report to the Ramada Inn. We go to the Ramada Inn. We were politely canned or laid off. We all had to sign confidentiality agreements. And that was in 2001 or 2002. I have not seen those units out anywhere yet, because the big concern here, as with all this technology, is not just oil. Oil is a big concern, but power, money, and control. There's the three reasons why they do not want this kind of stuff coming out, because the energy that these beings use is clean. It's not polluting.
Right.
And they're not using oil.
Right.
Now, you would think that our leaders, our so-called leaders, would be interested in cleaning up the air we breathe and preserving the environment. And too many times that's not the case. The dollar takes precedence. And this is why we're in the fix that we're in today. The other thing is, and they might, on this area, they may be correct in withholding some of this technology, because the first thing that would happen would be it would be weaponized. And obviously, we've got enough weapons now to destroy the Earth, so I don't think we need to add a whole lot more. But with the same technology, diseases can be cured. Even today, we use lasers for different eye surgeries. If you get a torn retina inside your eye, that was impossible to fix really before the advent of the laser. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some things shouldn't be out to the public, but a lot of that stuff should be out to the public, and it's just not going to happen. So,
well, you know what, Bob?
What's that?
This right now, I mean, has been one of the most interesting talks we've ever had.
Oh,
thank you so much.
You have talked about, you mentioned the book, Lifting the Veil.
Right.
When is that going to come out, and where can we find it?
Well, I just finished the book. Bob is going through it to make sure there's, everything is correct and written right. Then we'll have to approach a book publisher.
There's also the Andreasson Affair has been republished, and people that are interested could find that on Amazon.com. And the other books, the older ones, if you go to our website, AndreassonAffair.com, and look under Ray Fowler's name, he still has some of those older books for sale that can be purchased directly from him. But the other thing that we're trying to accomplish, a lot of people that have these experiences are so frightened to speak, and they're worried about ridicule, maybe losing airline pilots can lose their jobs. We know that's happened. But, we want people to know that, look, it's not the end of the world, and you're not alone, you're not crazy. Right. These things are happening more and more frequently, actually.
Right, and it seems to run in families. My daughter Rebecca has had experiences ever since she was a baby. One particular experience will be in the book that I've written, but I can't tell exactly what happened. But the Andreasson legacy would have that information, and if people wanted to know. But she's had experiences right up and along going as well. As I said, when she was only about 2 or 3 years old, she was abducted, and I was shocked because she was taken out of the house.
There's another point. Another point I would like to bring up. My dad worked on the space program. He has some of the stuff that he's initialed is still on the moon. To the day he died, he would never tell me what his knowledge was of this phenomenon. My dad was a very patriotic man. He served 4 years in the Navy, and he served 4 years in the Army when the war broke out, World War II. But he would never tell me what his knowledge was of this. On the other hand, my mother told me that she had seen a UFO and seen the inside of it, yet she would not go for hypnosis because she was so fearful of finding out what happened. And this isn't, just you look at, it's my mother, she was older at the time. I had talked to men that had served in special forces that were in combat, that were afraid to undergo hypnosis when they had, to find out what had happened when they had seen these craft. I've been contacted by Marines that claim that they have seen UFOs rising out of the jungles in Vietnam. I have been contacted by a number of sailors that have told me about their experiences while on various various ships, and Air Force personnel, Air Force mechanics, Air Force crew members. Now, all these people are afraid of what might happen if they talk. Even when we were at MIT, even one of the professors pulled me aside and told me about a sighting he had himself, and yet he could not discuss it. He wouldn't.
A young man had told me of a case where he was out at sea and they were fishing and they had thrown their nets out, and all of a sudden a craft lifted right up, the net and all, and he was shocked. You know, I don't want to mention his name, but that was something also.
Sure, these things are happening.
But to both of you, we want to thank you. Thank you both again for joining us, and we wish you both the best.
Our pleasure. We really appreciate the chance to get the story out. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's no way that we could possibly talk about the history and the story of you both in just 2 hours. It's just an amazing thing. And I cannot. I can't wait for the next book to come out. I'm definitely going to be buying it.
Thank you, but it's not going to be like a Ray Fowler because he's an investigator. We're not writers actually, but we're giving our life story and we're letting the people know. And my last experience, what had happened was I have a handprint of the beings. It left a handprint on my mirror.
See, that's something interesting to no matter, you don't have to be an author or a great writer. I want to hear about that, and I'd love to hear that from you guys. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and God bless you both, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you both.
Okay, bye now.
Bye. Okay, I'm not sure if we're still getting an echo. Are we?
Not now.
No, not now. See, it was as soon as we got them on the line, we got that echo.
Interesting.
I wonder if this show is being bugged and listened to. I knew that was going to happen. As soon as we hung up with them, we'd not have that echo anymore. Because Lucy and I have been trying throughout the entire show to try and call back in and change our phones. I've changed my phone to my cell phone, and it still had no effect on it. So there's got to be something with the connection on their line.
But, I mean, the story is absolutely amazing. And, of course, we couldn't cover everything in 2 hours, but we got a lot.
We got a lot. And, I'm thankful that they actually talked and we basically sat by and listened so that nobody had to hear the echoing that we had going on. But, I meant what I said. There's no way that we can possibly get everything down within 2 hours. As you can hear, there's so many different stories, not just from back in 1967 and earlier, but also to what they're dealing with and having to deal with now between all of the government agencies and cover-ups and the issues and, the harassment that they've had for some time now. It's amazing. And did I catch it that they said that her two daughters are actually in the military? Is that what she had said?
Yeah, she mentioned it, but that's the first that I heard about that.
Yeah, right. And so it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of interesting to hear that and to be dealing with issues of the military on their own end. So it's kind of ironic almost.
Well, she did say that the next book, Lifting the Veil, will talk about their lives. So hopefully they'll get into that and how it's affected their whole family. Like she said, her daughter had an experience. And if they're in the military, I'm really curious as to how that's working out.
One of the things that caught my attention, and I wrote it down, actually I wrote a few things down as they were talking, and I know we only have about 7 minutes left in the show, but one of the weird things that sort of popped out in my mind was when they talked about having a call from the United Nations asking for them to put down their story on paper and send it to them. That I have no idea as to why that would be requested by the United Nations, unless it was somebody playing a trick and acting as though they were from the United Nations. But it's kind of odd why the United Nations would have anything to do with this.
Isn't there, if I recall correctly, in previous shows that we've done, isn't there a member of the United Nations or someone who actually got abducted or there's some kind of experience? There's something, if I recall, and I have to go back and look this up now, because I do believe... that there's something that may have happened involving someone with the United Nations? Is it possible that this is part of their investigation, overlapping into what they experienced?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember that story or recall that, so if you do find out something, if you do some research, let me know about it, because it's not familiar to me. It may be familiar to you guys who are listening, but I'm not aware of it. And I do want to just reiterate one thing. The running theme throughout their entire storytelling tonight is it just seems, and again, I cannot stress it enough, and I'm sorry, I repeat myself, but it just seems as though that there is this fine line that connects everything together, all of the paranormals together. And if you can remember, and if you re-listen to the show again, you'll hear Betty talking about bright lights constantly throughout this whole entire storytelling episode. I wouldn't call it an interview because it's basically them telling us the stories. But throughout the entire time that they were talking, especially with Betty, it's bright lights, and these is sort of celestial, spiritual beings or essence, even within herself, that she says she was transformed into that. So there is some truth I'm finding, the more and more that we talk to folks, that there is this line, that there is this connection between all of these different paranormal phenomena. What it is, I don't know, but I'm just seeing the similarities, and they cannot be denied. And it's just another case to mark, down into your binder, that there is some sort of connection, and it is up to us to try and see how we can try and figure that out, or if it's even possible to figure it out. But nonetheless, amazing. Betty and Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a blast. I got goosebumps the entire time that they were talking, so this was an exciting show for me. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've got 4 minutes, so very quickly, I want to go to the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week. And this week, he is all the way from Zagreb, Croatia, and his name is Tomislav Beljaz. He likes ghost adventures, The Walking Dead, A Haunting, metal music, horror movies, and, of course, he likes Paranormal Review Radio. Thank you so much for being a fan, and congratulations.
His name is, from what I can see, Tomislav Beljaz. So I just want to make sure that I say his name right. Don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, just like us on Facebook or subscribe to us on YouTube at Paranormal Review Radio.
Okay, let's talk about next week. It is the weekend of the blood moon. There will be a partial solar eclipse, a supermoon, and many believe that this will trigger some kind of catastrophic global event. There will be earthquakes, wildfires, economic collapse. It's all being predicted. Now, are we facing the end of life as we know it? Is this the end? Join us next week as we prepare for what's coming. We're going to look at the prophecies and the things that may have already begun. Have you noticed anything changing? Well, this might be our last show, so please be here and call in to talk about it next Friday night. Thank you, everyone, for spending another Friday night with us. We have the best fans in the universe, and you prove that to us every week. Thank you, Anthony, for being the best co-host around. So, until next week, my little space travelers, never stop asking questions, and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio.
The next time you need auto parts and accessories, trust the parts professionals at the 102 Chicagoland O'Reilly Auto Parts stores. Our professional parts people know what it takes to get the job done right. Professionals have counted on O'Reilly Auto Parts for decades. Now you can too. Professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts, better prices every day.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.